On a sweltering afternoon in June 2023, inside the office of the North Korean embassy, located in the Miramar district of Havana, Counselor Kang Chan-hyuk sat at his desk, decoding an encrypted message, transmitted from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pyongyang. Outside his window, the scorching Caribbean sun poured through the palm tree leaves, casting dancing shadows across the worn wooden floor. At 46 years old, Kang was considered a rising star in North Korea's diplomatic corps, an elite who had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of the regime's foreign service, devote all efforts to blocking the Korea-Cuba diplomatic normalization, employ every available means necessary. Pyongyang's instructions were, as always, crystal clear, yet beneath the surface lurked a cold, suffocating pressure that Kang had come to know all too well. He exhaled deeply and turned his gaze toward the window. Beyond that azure sea, across thousands of miles, what was happening on the southern half of the Korean peninsula? His mind wandered to the USB drive hidden deep within his desk drawer. A small piece of plastic that contained secrets dangerous enough to cost him his life. For the past 3 months, Kang had been secretly downloading South Korean news articles, documentary footage, and analytical reports onto that USB drive. He could only access this forbidden material at 3 in the morning, when everyone else in the embassy compound was asleep, when the surveillance cameras seemed to blink less frequently, when the informants among his colleagues were lost in their dreams. Those stolen hours of revelation had fundamentally shaken the worldview he had carefully constructed over 2 decades of service to the regime. The first video he had watched was a BBC documentary titled, The Two Koreas, a tale of divergence, produced in late 2022. The stark contrast presented in that 50-minute film had left him speechless. Nighttime satellite imagery showed the Korean peninsula, the south ablaze with countless lights, cities glowing like constellations, highways threading through the landscape like luminous rivers, while the north remained almost entirely dark, save for a small pinpoint that was Pyongyang. It was as if he were looking at 2 different planets, not 2 halves of the same nation. But it was not just the material wealth that disturbed him. It was the casual freedom, the unguarded smiles, the way ordinary South Koreans spoke their minds without glancing over their shoulders. In one video, he watched young people in Seoul, openly criticizing their president, their government, their policies, right there on the street. Filmed by news cameras, broadcast for millions to see. No one arrested them. No one dragged them away in the night. No one punished their families for 3 generations. Kang had spent his entire adult life in service to a system that demanded absolute loyalty. He had written reports praising the dear leader's wisdom, had attended ideological study sessions, where he recited the 10 principles of the monolithic ideological system, and had informed on colleagues who whispered doubts in unguarded moments. He had done all of this not just to survive, but to excel, to rise, to secure a better position for his family. Yet here in Havana, thousands of miles from Pyongyang's watchful eyes, the cognitive dissonance had become unbearable. The mission assigned to him was, in reality, impossible. South Korea and Cuba have been gradually warming their relations since 2019. Cuban officials, desperate for economic partnerships beyond their traditional allies, had shown increasing interest in Seoul's offer of investment, technology transfer, and trade agreements. North Korea's leverage was diminishing by the day. What could Pyongyang offer Cuba? Outdated weapons systems? Ideological solidarity that could not feed hungry mouths or repair crumbling infrastructure? Kang had attended countless meetings with Cuban foreign ministry officials. Over the past 18 months, he had delivered stern warnings, thinly veiled threats, passionate appeals to revolutionary brotherhood. But he could see it in their eyes. The Cubans were done with empty promises. They had watched China transform itself through economic opening. They had witnessed Vietnam's remarkable growth. They understood that the old ways were leading nowhere but deeper into poverty. During a particularly tense meeting on May 15, 2023, at the Cuban Foreign Ministry's ornate building on Calle Calzada, Deputy Foreign Minister Carlos Fernandez had looked at Kang with something resembling pity. "Counselor Kang," he had said in measured Spanish, which Kang understood perfectly. "After 6 years in Latin America, the world has changed. We respect your country's sovereignty and its right to choose its own path. But Cuba must also think of its future, of its people. We cannot remain frozen in time." Those words had echoed in Kang's mind for weeks. We cannot remain frozen in time. Yet that was precisely what North Korea demanded, that the entire world remain frozen. That the revolution of 1945 continue indefinitely. That the logic of the Cold War prevail forever. It was during the early morning hours of June 8, 2023, that Kang watched a South Korean news report that would change everything. The report, aired on KBS on June 5, detailed North Korea's latest missile test and the international community's response. But what struck Kang was not the geopolitical analysis. It was a brief interview with a North Korean defector, a former diplomat like himself, who had escaped through Southeast Asia 5 years earlier. The defector, whose face was obscured and voice disguised for security reasons, spoke words that pierced Kang's heart. "I spent 20 years telling myself that I was serving my country, serving my people. But in truth, I was serving a system that enslaves my people, that starves them, that imprisons them in a vast open-air prison. The hardest thing to accept was that I had been complicit, that my silence, my service, my loyalty had helped perpetuate their suffering." Kang paused the video and sat in the darkness of his office, his hands trembling. He thought of his daughter, Yena, now 14 years old, and his son, Minho, 12. What future awaited them in North Korea? Yena was bright, curious, and constantly asking questions that made him uncomfortable. "Father, why can't we see grandmother in Pyongyang more often? Father, why do the Cuban children have internet on their phones, but we don't? Father, is it true that in South Korea, anyone can become anything they want?" He had deflected these questions, changed the subject, and told her that such curiosity was dangerous. But how long could he continue lying to his own children? How long could he watch their spirits slowly crushed by the system, their curiosity replaced by cautious conformity, their dreams narrowed to the small space the regime permitted? On June 12, 2023, Kang received another encrypted message from Pyongyang. The tone had shifted from directive to threatening. "Your reports indicate insufficient progress in the Cuba matter. The ministry questions your commitment and effectiveness. Recall to Pyongyang for a comprehensive review is being considered." Anyone versed in the regime's language understood what "comprehensive review" meant. It was not a performance evaluation. It was an investigation, an inquisition. A process that could end in demotion, imprisonment, or worse. And if Kang fell from grace, his entire family would fall with him. That was the iron law of the system. Collective punishment, guilt by association, 3 generations of retribution. That evening, as the Caribbean sun set in a blaze of orange and red, Kang sat in his modest apartment within the embassy compound. His wife, Soo Yeon, was preparing dinner. The children were doing homework at the small table by the window. He watched them, these 3 people who meant everything to him, and felt a profound sense of grief and rage. Soo Yeon looked up and caught his gaze. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly in Korean, her eyes showing the worry that had become her constant companion over the years. "Nothing," he lied automatically. "Just tired." But it was not nothing. It was everything. In that moment, Kang Chan-hyuk, devoted servant of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, decorated diplomat, trusted member of the elite, made a decision that would alter the course of his family's life forever. That night, unable to sleep, Kang took out a notebook and began writing. Not in the stilted, propagandistic language of official reports, but in plain, honest words. He wrote about the lies he had told, the truths he had suppressed, the contradictions he had rationalized. He wrote about the children starving in North Korea's provinces while Pyongyang's elite dined on imported delicacies. He wrote about the political prisoners he knew existed but never spoke about. He wrote about the fear that governed every waking moment in that system. The fear of saying the wrong thing, thinking the wrong thought, showing the wrong expression. He wrote, "I have served this system with all my heart for 23 years. I have sacrificed my conscience, my integrity, my peace of mind. I told myself it was for the greater good, for the revolution, for the people. But who are the people I serve? Not the millions who suffer in silence. Not the children who will inherit a broken, isolated, impoverished nation. Not my own son and daughter, whose futures are being stolen from them day by day. I have two choices now. I can continue on this path, be recalled to Pyongyang, face whatever awaits me there, and watch my children grow up in a system without hope, without freedom, without future. Or I can take an action so radical, so dangerous, that even thinking it feels like treason." He paused, his pen hovering over the paper. Then he wrote the words that would define his destiny. "I will take my family out of this darkness. I will give my children a chance at a real life, in a real country, where they can dream without fear. I will defect to the Republic of Korea." Writing those words felt simultaneously like liberation and like stepping off a cliff into an abyss. There was no going back now. The thought had been crystallized, given form, made real. And Kang Chan-hyuk knew himself well enough to understand that once he had decided something, once he had committed himself to a course of action, he would see it through no matter the cost. 3 days later, on June 15, 2023, something unexpected happened. A diplomatic pouch arrived from Pyongyang containing official documents. Among them was a certificate Kang Chan-hyuk had been awarded the Order of the National Flag, 3rd class, for his outstanding contributions to the diplomatic struggle against imperialist forces. It was signed by Foreign Minister Cho Sun-wei herself and bore the official seal of the ministry. Under normal circumstances, such recognition would have filled Kang with pride. It was a significant honor, one that elevated his status and protected his family's position within the hierarchy. His colleagues in the embassy congratulated him, some with genuine warmth, others with thinly veiled envy. But as Kang held that certificate in his hands, staring at the elaborate calligraphy and the red seal, all he felt was revulsion. This piece of paper represented everything he had come to despise: the empty symbolism, the hollow praise, the system's way of binding its servants more tightly with golden chains of recognition and privilege. He thought of the defector's words from the KBS interview, "I had been complicit." This award was not honoring his service to the people or to any noble cause. It was honoring his effectiveness in perpetuating the regime, in serving its interests, in helping maintain the system that oppressed 25 million people. That night, Kang placed the certificate in his desk drawer, closed it, and began planning in earnest. He had perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3, before Pyongyang would expect him to acknowledge the award. Before they would expect renewed vigor in his mission, before they would notice if something was amiss. 2 weeks to plan the most dangerous operation of his life. 2 weeks to figure out how to extract his entire family from the system's grasp. 2 weeks to transform from a loyal servant of the regime into a traitor who would be hunted until the day he died. As he sat in his darkened office, the sounds of Havana's nightlife drifting through his window. Salsa music and laughter mixing with the warm Caribbean breeze, Kang Chan-hyuk, counselor of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, made his final commitment. He would escape this red island, this island of beautiful weather and ugly secrets. He would take his family to the south, to the land of light. He had seen in those satellite images, to the place where his children could ask questions without fear and dream dreams without limits. The cracks in his faith had widened into a chasm. Now he would have to leap across it, and pray that something solid waited on the other side. The decision was made. There was no turning back. The news arrived on June 18, 2023, like a thunderclap that only Kang Chan-hyuk could hear. A confidential cable from the Cuban Foreign Ministry, intercepted and translated by the embassy's intelligence section, revealed that South Korea and Cuba were accelerating their normalization talks. A preliminary agreement was expected to be signed within 60 days, possibly as early as mid-August. The cable, marked "strictly confidential" and dated June 16, outlined the basic framework: mutual recognition, exchange of ambassadors, and economic cooperation agreements worth an estimated $500 million over 5 years. Kang sat at his desk, reading the document with a strange mixture of professional alarm and personal relief. Professionally, this was a catastrophic failure. His mission, the very reason Pyongyang had placed him in Havana, had utterly collapsed. The regime's influence in Cuba, built over decades of revolutionary solidarity, was evaporating like morning dew under the Caribbean sun. Personally, however, this news represented something else entirely: the window of opportunity he had been waiting for. That evening, Kang conducted a careful analysis of his situation, the kind of strategic assessment he had been trained to perform at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Elite Academy in Pyongyang years ago. But this time applying it to his own survival rather than the regime's interests. Scenario 1: if he reported the intelligence accurately and recommended that Pyongyang accept the inevitable, he would be blamed for defeatism and lack of fighting spirit. Possible outcome: recall to Pyongyang for consultation, which could easily transform into indefinite detention and investigation. Scenario 2: if he suppressed the information and continued reporting false optimism, the truth would eventually emerge when the Cuba-South Korea deal was announced publicly. He would then be accused of incompetence or, worse, of deliberately misleading the leadership. Possible outcome: recall to Pyongyang for comprehensive review, a euphemism that made his blood run cold. Scenario 3: if he attempted some desperate action to sabotage the negotiations, such as leaking embarrassing information or coordinating with hardline Cuban elements, and failed, he would face charges of reckless behavior endangering state interests. If he succeeded but was discovered to have acted without authorization, he would face charges of exceeding his authority. Either way, recall to Pyongyang. There was no winning scenario within the system. Every path led back to Pyongyang, and Pyongyang now meant danger, investigation, potential destruction. The regime was tightening its grip, purging officials suspected of insufficient loyalty, making examples of those who failed in their duties. Kim Jong-un's consolidation of power had entered a new, more paranoid phase in 2023. And Kang had read enough classified reports to know that foreign ministry officials were not immune to the purges. The window was open now, but it would not remain open for long. Once the Cuba-South Korea deal became public knowledge, once Pyongyang fully grasped the magnitude of this diplomatic defeat, the regime would look for scapegoats. And Kang Chan-hyuk, the man who had been in charge of preventing exactly this outcome, would be at the top of that list. He had 1 week, perhaps 2 at most, before the situation became irreversible. On the night of June 19, 2023, after the children had gone to bed, Kang sat down with his wife, Soo Yeon, in their small living room. The apartment was modest by Western standards but luxurious compared to what most North Koreans endured: 3 rooms, functioning electricity, running water. Even a small television that received Cuban channels, though they rarely watched it. Soo Yeon was folding laundry, a domestic task that seemed to calm her nerves. At 43, she remained a handsome woman, but the years of living under constant stress had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth. She had been a promising pianist at Pyongyang's Kim Won-gyun Music Conservatory when they met. But marriage to a diplomat meant her career had been subordinated to his, her dreams quietly shelved for the sake of family duty. Soo Yeon, Kang began, his voice low and controlled, "I need to tell you something. And you need to listen carefully without reacting, because the walls here have ears." She looked up, her hands stilling on the shirt she was folding. 20 years of marriage had taught her to read his expressions, and what she saw now frightened her. "What is it?" "We are leaving Cuba," he said simply. "The 4 of us. We are leaving, and we are not going back to North Korea." For a moment, she simply stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. Then, in a whisper that was somehow more forceful than a shout, "Have you lost your mind? Stop joking about such things. This is not funny." "I am not joking," Kang replied, his gaze steady. "I have never been more serious in my life. The situation here has become impossible. Pyongyang will recall me within weeks, maybe days. When that happens, we will face investigation, possibly punishment. Our children will suffer. Their futures will be destroyed. I cannot allow that to happen." Soo Yeon's face had gone pale. "You are talking about treason. You are talking about betraying everything, everyone we know. My parents are still in Pyongyang. Your brother, your colleagues. If we do this, they will all suffer. 3 generations, Chan-hyuk. You know the law. 3 generations." "I know," he said quietly, and the weight of that knowledge nearly crushed him. "I know exactly what this means. I have thought of nothing else for days. But our parents are old, they have lived their lives. Our siblings are adults who made their own choices. But Ye-na and Min-ho? They are children. They deserve a chance at a real life, a real future. Not the slow death we have been living." "The slow death we have been living?" Soo Yeon's voice rose slightly, though she caught herself and lowered it again. "We have been living better than 99% of our countrymen. We have food, heat, safety. Do you know what you are proposing? You want to throw all of that away. And run to the south, to live among enemies, to become traitors forever marked by our choice?" The argument continued in fierce whispers until nearly 3 in the morning. Soo Yeon raised every objection, voiced every fear, challenged every assumption. She was not a woman easily swayed by emotion or rhetoric. Her mind was sharp, her instinct for self-preservation strong. And Kang knew that he could not force her, could not manipulate her, could only present the truth as he saw it and hope that she would understand. He told her about the satellite images, about the defector's testimony, about the impossibility of his current mission. He explained the political situation in Pyongyang, the increasing paranoia, and the purges. He described what he had learned about South Korea, not from propaganda but from neutral sources, from UN reports and foreign news agencies. He painted a picture of 2 futures: one in which they returned to Pyongyang and slowly watched their family destroyed by the system's grinding machinery, and another in which they took a terrible risk for a chance at something better. "You say the South is our enemy," Kang said as dawn began to lighten the sky outside their window. "But who taught us that? The same people who told us we were winning the war, the same people who told us our economy was strong. The same people who told us the people loved the leadership. How many of those things were true? When will we stop believing the lies?" Soo Yeon sat in silence for a long time, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and frightened. If we do this, if we really do this, we can never come back. We will never see our families again. We will be homeless, stateless, people without a country. No, Kang said gently, reaching for her hand. We will have a country. Korea. The real Korea, the one that did not build walls around its people, the one that did not starve millions, the one that lets children dream. South Korea is our country too, Soo Yeon. It is the Korea our grandparents knew before the division, before the war, before all the madness. We are not betraying Korea. We are returning to it. Whether it was his words or simple exhaustion or the accumulated weight of her own doubts, something in Soo Yeon finally broke. She lowered her head and began to cry, quietly, hopelessly. Kang held her, and in that embrace, he felt her resistance crumbling. How much time do we have? She asked finally, her voice muffled against his shoulder. 1 week, he said. 7 days to prepare, to plan, to gather what we need. Then we must act. The next morning, June 20, 2023, Kang Chan-hyuk began the most intensive week of his life. He had executed complex diplomatic operations before, coordinated delicate negotiations, had managed sensitive intelligence matters. But this was different. This was not about advancing the regime's interests, this was about saving his family's lives. And the margin for error was exactly zero. He began by researching travel routes. The obvious path would be through Mexico, which had no extradition treaty with North Korea and a relatively porous border with the United States. From Mexico, they could claim asylum at the U.S. border and request transfer to South Korea. But this route had a fatal flaw: it would require several days of travel through potentially hostile territory, days during which Pyongyang would discover their absence and alert every friendly intelligence service in the hemisphere. The alternative was more audacious but potentially faster. A direct flight to a European country with a South Korean embassy, preferably one with minimal North Korean presence. He studied flight schedules from Havana, cross-referenced them with diplomatic calendars, and assessed the political climate in various potential destination countries. On June 21, he made his decision: they would fly to Amsterdam. The Netherlands had a significant South Korean embassy, a strong human rights record, and relatively weak ties to North Korea. There was a direct KLM flight from Havana to Amsterdam twice a week, on Wednesdays and Saturdays. The next available flight was Saturday, June 24, departing at 11:45 p.m. That gave him 3 days. Using a secure computer at a local internet cafe, one of the few places in Havana where he could access the web without embassy monitoring, Kang purchased 4 one-way tickets to Amsterdam. Using a credit card linked to an account he had quietly opened months earlier, funded by small amounts diverted from his official allowance. The transaction was in his own name. There was no point in using false identities for the initial flight, since they would be traveling on their real North Korean diplomatic passports. The deception would only work if the embassy believed they were on authorized travel. Creating a plausible cover story was the most delicate operation. Kang spent hours crafting a memo to the ambassador, explaining that he needed to travel to Europe for an urgent consultation with North Korean representatives at the United Nations in Geneva regarding the Cuba situation. He mentioned that he was bringing his family because his daughter Yena had a medical appointment at a specialized clinic in Switzerland that had been scheduled months in advance. A supposed follow-up for a minor heart condition that had been diagnosed during their last home leave. The medical excuse was perfect because it was both intimate enough to discourage detailed questions and serious enough to justify the sudden travel. He backdated several documents, created a paper trail of the fictitious medical appointments. Even forged a letter from a Swiss clinic using letterhead he had obtained during a previous official trip to Geneva. The forgery was not perfect, but it did not need to be. It only needed to withstand casual scrutiny for a few days. On June 22, he submitted the travel request to Ambassador Ri Sung-gil. The ambassador, a portly man in his 60s more concerned with his own comfort than with his subordinates' activities, approved the request with barely a glance. "Make sure you report back within 10 days, he said, waving his hand dismissively. "And do not spend too much on the girl's treatment. You know how the ministry scrutinizes medical expenses." "Of course, Comrade Ambassador," Kang replied, bowing slightly. "I will be most frugal." Walking out of the ambassador's office with the approved travel authorization in his hand, Kang felt a surge of adrenaline so intense he thought his heart might burst. The first hurdle was cleared. Now came the truly dangerous part. That evening, Kang and Su Yian sat down with Ye Na and Min Ho. This was perhaps the most agonizing conversation of all because they could not tell the children the whole truth. Ye Na, at 14, was old enough to understand the gravity of defection, but she was also at an age where emotions could override caution. Min Ho, at 12, was still young enough that a misplaced word at school or with another embassy child could unravel everything. "We are taking a trip," Kang told them, keeping his voice light and casual. "A short vacation to Europe. Just the 4 of us. It will be fun." "But I have school," Ye Na protested, though her eyes lit up with interest. Foreign travel was rare and exciting. "You will miss a few days," Su Yian said, managing a smile. "We will tell your teachers you are sick. It will be fine." "Where are we going?" Min Ho asked eagerly. "Amsterdam first, then maybe Paris," Kang replied, mixing truth with deception. "We will see museums, eat nice food, and have adventures. But you must promise me something, both of you. You must not tell anyone we are going. Not your friends, not your teachers, not anyone at the embassy. This is our family's secret, our special surprise. Can you promise?" Both children nodded solemnly, thrilled to be included in a conspiracy, innocent of its true nature. That night, as Kang packed their few belongings into 2 small suitcases, careful to include nothing that would seem suspicious, nothing that would suggest permanent departure, he felt the full weight of what he was about to do. In 72 hours, they would either be safe in a South Korean embassy, beginning a new life, or they would be captured, returned to Pyongyang in chains, made examples of for every other potential defector. There was no middle ground, no partial success, no consolation prize. It was all or nothing, freedom or destruction. June 23, 2023. Their last night in Cuba. Kang lay awake in the darkness, listening to Su Yian's breathing beside him, to the distant sounds of Havana at night drifting through the window. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would drive to the airport, board that plane, and cross a threshold from which there was no return. He thought about all the things he was leaving behind: his career, his status, his colleagues, his country. He thought about his parents in Pyongyang, both in their 70s now, who would face interrogation and possibly punishment because of his actions. He thought about his younger brother, a mid-level party official, whose career would be destroyed by association with a traitor. The guilt was enormous, almost paralyzing. But then he thought about Ye Na's questions, about Min Ho's curiosity, about the light slowly dying in their eyes as the system ground them down. He thought about the defector's words: "I had been complicit." No more complicity. No more lies. No more service to a system that devoured its children. Tomorrow, they would escape. Tomorrow, they would be free, or they would be dead. Either outcome was better than continuing to live half a life in service to a lie. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Kang Chan-hyuk rose from his bed and began the final preparations for the most important day of his life. 7 days of secrets were about to culminate in one desperate gamble for freedom. The morning of June 24, 2023, dawned with deceptive tranquility. The sky over Havana was a flawless blue, the kind of Caribbean morning that travel brochures celebrate and tourists cherish. But for Kang Chan-hyuk, every moment felt laden with invisible threat, every sound amplified, every shadow suspicious. He moved through the day's routine with mechanical precision, his face a carefully maintained mask of normalcy while his mind raced through contingencies and catastrophes. The KLM flight to Amsterdam was scheduled to depart at 11:45 p.m. which meant they needed to arrive at José Martí International Airport by approximately 9:00 p.m. for international check-in. Kang had calculated everything down to the minute they would leave the embassy compound at 7:30 p.m. claiming they were going to an early dinner before their late-night departure. This timing would minimize the window during which anyone might question their movements or attempt to verify their story. At 6:45 p.m., with the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Kang made his final preparations. He had packed their 2 small suitcases days earlier, including only what would be plausible for a 10-day trip: clothes, toiletries. A few books for the children, nothing that would suggest permanent departure. Soo Yeon had been instructed to wear her good jewelry, the gold necklace and earrings that had been gifts from his parents, items that could be sold if necessary, but would not attract attention since she often wore them for formal occasions. Kang himself dressed in a business suit, appropriate for diplomatic travel. He gathered the documents they would need: 4 North Korean diplomatic passports, the travel authorization signed by Ambassador Ri, the forged letter from the Swiss medical clinic, and several hundred Cuban convertible pesos for immediate expenses. Then he reached for his diplomatic briefcase, the leather attaché case embossed with the DPRK state emblem that he had carried to countless meetings over the years. It was a symbol of his status, his authority, his position within the system. But more practically, it contained additional documents that might prove useful: copies of classified cables, internal embassy correspondence, and intelligence assessments that could demonstrate his value to South Korean authorities and expedite their asylum process. He placed his hand on the briefcase, then paused. Something felt wrong, a nagging sense of incompletion. He mentally reviewed his checklist: passports, check travel authorization, check money, check tickets, check children's medications, check. Everything was accounted for. Chan-hyuk, we need to go, Soo Yeon called from the living room, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. It is already 7 o'clock. Coming, he replied, pushing aside the uneasy feeling. He took one last look around his office, at the desk where he had spent 6 years of his life serving a regime he no longer believed in, at the framed photograph of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il on the wall, at the red flag in the corner. Then he turned off the light and walked away. They assembled in the apartment's small foyer at 7:15 p.m. Kang and Soo Yeon, Ye-na and Minho, 2 suitcases, and a shoulder bag containing snacks and entertainment for the long flight. The children were excited, chattering about the adventure ahead, blissfully unaware of the real stakes. Soo Yeon's face was pale but composed, her hand gripping Minho's shoulder perhaps a bit too tightly. Remember, Kang said quietly to his wife, we are just going to dinner, then the airport. Nothing unusual. We smile, we are calm, we are a family going on a pleasant trip. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Kang's original plan had been to drive their assigned embassy vehicle to a nearby restaurant, eat a quick meal to maintain appearances, then continue to the airport. However, at the last moment, he reconsidered. If they left the car at the airport, it would immediately signal something wrong when the embassy noticed it the next day. Better to take a taxi, which would leave no trace. He changed plans on the spot. We will take a taxi, he announced. The embassy car needs maintenance. I reported it to the motor pool this morning. No sense driving an unreliable vehicle for such an important trip. It was a lie, but a plausible one, the kind of small deception that had become second nature during his years in the diplomatic service. They walked toward the compound's main entrance, where he planned to hail a taxi from the street. The compound was quiet. Most embassy staff were in their apartments preparing dinner or already eating. The gate guard, a retired Cuban policeman named Raul who had worked for the embassy for 15 years, sat in his small booth reading a newspaper. But as they approached the main entrance, the front door of the ambassador's residence, located just 30 meters from the gate, suddenly opened. Kang's heart seized in his chest. Ambassador Ri Sung-gil stepped out, and beside him was Pak Chol-min, the embassy's security officer. A cold-eyed man in his 50s who reported directly to the Ministry of State Security. Pak's presence at the embassy was ostensibly to provide security. But everyone understood his real function: internal surveillance, watching the watchers, ensuring that no one strayed from absolute loyalty. "Comrade Counselor Kang," Ambassador Ri called out, waving genially. "I see you are departing for your trip. Excellent timing. Officer Pak and I were just discussing your Geneva consultation. Come, let us have a brief word before you go." There was no refusing. To do so would immediately arouse suspicion. Kang forced his face into a pleasant expression and walked toward the two men, his mind racing through possibilities and dangers. Su Yian and the children remained by the gate, frozen with uncertainty. "Ambassador, Officer Pak," Kang said, bowing slightly. "I apologize, but our taxi will arrive momentarily, and we have dinner reservations before the flight. Perhaps we could discuss this matter upon my return?" "It will only take a moment," Pak Chol-min said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I have reviewed your travel authorization, and I have a few questions regarding the Geneva consultation. Specifically, I notice that no meeting schedule has been provided. No contact information for the UN representatives you are supposedly meeting, and no confirmation from the Geneva mission. These oversights concern me." Kang's mouth went dry. This was the nightmare scenario: interrogation at the moment of escape, questions he had hoped to avoid until after they were safely airborne. Pak was not a man who asked casual questions. Every inquiry was a probe, a test, a trap waiting to be sprung. "Officer Pak," Kang replied, keeping his voice steady, "the Geneva consultation was arranged through secure channels at the ministry level. I received my instructions via encrypted cable, as is standard for sensitive discussions. The meeting details are classified. Surely you understand that. I cannot discuss operational intelligence matters in an open setting, even within our own compound." It was a calculated gamble, using classification and protocol as a shield, appealing to the security officer's own rigid adherence to compartmentalization. For a long moment, Pak stared at him, his eyes showing nothing, calculating something behind that impassive facade. "And the medical appointment in Switzerland?" Pak continued. "For your daughter's heart condition? I have no record of any prior medical reports regarding such a condition." "When was this diagnosed?" "During our home leave in March." Kang lied smoothly, his years of diplomatic deception serving him well. "The ministry clinic in Pyongyang conducted the examination. The doctors recommended follow-up with a specialist, given the limited cardiac facilities available domestically. The appointment was arranged through the Geneva Embassy's medical liaison. Again, the documentation would be in classified medical files." Another long silence. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. The sun had dipped below the buildings now, and shadows were lengthening across the compound. Su Yian stood by the gate, her face a mask of terror poorly concealed. Then Ambassador Ri, bless his bureaucratic indifference, intervened. "Officer Pak, I am satisfied with Comrade Kang's explanations. He has served loyally for many years and has never given cause for suspicion. Let the man take his daughter to her medical appointment. We can review any documentation concerns when he returns. Pak's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of his displeasure at being overruled. But the ambassador's rank carried weight, and even security officers had to observe certain protocols. Very well, he said coldly. But I will be filing a report regarding these irregularities. Safe travels, comrade counselor. The dismissal was clear. Kang bowed again, turned, and walked back to his family with measured steps. Every fiber of his being screaming to run but knowing that any sign of panic would be fatal. Only when they had passed through the gate and were standing on the sidewalk did he allow himself to breathe again. What did they want? Su Yian whispered urgently. Questions, Kang replied quietly. But we are clear. Now we must move quickly. He hailed a passing taxi, a yellow Lada that had seen better decades. The driver, a cheerful older man who introduced himself as Ernesto, loaded their luggage into the trunk and started the meter. Jose Marti International Airport, Kang said. International Terminal. And please, we are in something of a hurry. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Kang looked back at the embassy compound one final time. Pak Chul-min stood at the gate, watching their departure, a phone pressed to his ear. They arrived at Jose Marti International Airport at 8:35 p.m., earlier than planned, but Kang wanted maximum time to clear security and board. The terminal was moderately busy with evening departures to Mexico City, Madrid, and their own flight to Amsterdam. Kang paid Ernesto, overtipping generously, and they entered the departures hall. It was only as they approached the KLM check-in counter that Kang reached for his briefcase. And realized, with a sickening jolt of horror, that he was not carrying it. The briefcase. The diplomatic briefcase containing those classified documents, those insurance policies that would prove his value to South Korean intelligence. He had set it down in his office, had placed his hand on it, had intended to pick it up. And then Su Yian had called to him and he had simply walked out, his mind so consumed with the larger operation that he had forgotten the one item that could make the difference between being welcomed as a valuable defector and being treated as merely another refugee. For a moment, he simply stood there, frozen with disbelief at his own stupidity. Of all the details he had planned, of all the contingencies he had considered, he had made the most basic, amateur mistake. He had forgotten something important. What is wrong? Su Yian asked, seeing his expression. Nothing, he lied automatically. There was no point telling her, no point inducing more panic. The briefcase was gone, irretrievable. They could not go back for it by now. Pak Chul-min had probably already begun making calls, checking their story, perhaps even searching Kang's office. The window was closing rapidly. Let us check in, he said, pushing forward. The KLM agent, a young Cuban woman with excellent English, processed their passports efficiently. Traveling to Amsterdam, family of 4, diplomatic passports from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, she recited. Do you have any baggage to check? 2 bags, Kang replied, heaving the suitcases onto the scale. And the purpose of your visit to the Netherlands? Transit to Switzerland for medical consultation, Kang said, producing the forged clinic letter. My daughter has an appointment at a cardiac specialist facility. The agent barely glanced at the letter, more interested in her computer screen. Very well. Your boarding passes. The flight departs from Gate 12 at 11:45 p.m. Boarding begins at 1100 p.m. Have a pleasant journey. They moved through passport control without incident. The Cuban immigration officer stamped their passports with board efficiency, waving them through. Security screening was similarly routine. By 9:15 p.m., they were in the international departures area, past the point of no return. Kang found seats near gate 12 and sat down, trying to calm his racing heart. They had cleared the first hurdles. Now they simply had to wait for boarding, get on the plane, and pray that no alarm had been raised in time to stop their departure. But at 9:47 p.m., Kang's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his blood turned to ice. The call was from the embassy main line. Someone was trying to reach him, and at this hour, it could only be bad news. He did not answer. The phone rang 6 times, then stopped. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Kang made a decision. He powered off his phone completely, removing any possibility of tracking or continued calls. Then he stood and told Su Yian, "Stay here with the children. Do not move, do not talk to anyone. I will return shortly." "Where are you going?" she asked, alarm rising in her voice. "To make a call," he said simply. He found a pay-phone bank near the restrooms, blessedly still functional in an era when most travelers relied on mobile devices. He had memorized several important numbers before leaving the embassy, including the general contact number for the South Korean embassy in Havana. It was a long shot at nearly 1000 p.m. on a Saturday night. The embassy would likely be closed, staffed only by emergency duty officers if anyone at all. He dialed the number. It rang 7 times, then an answering machine message in Korean. "You have reached the Embassy of the Republic of Korea in Havana. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. For genuine emergencies, please press 1 to be connected to the duty officer." Kang pressed 1. The phone rang again, this time connecting to what sounded like a mobile number. After 4 rings, a young man's voice answered in Korean, sounding irritated at being disturbed. "Duty Officer Lee speaking. What is the nature of your emergency?" "My name is Kang Chan-hyuk," Kang said rapidly, his voice low and urgent. "I am a counselor at the North Korean embassy in Havana. I am currently at Jose Marti International Airport with my wife and 2 children, attempting to defect to the Republic of Korea. We have tickets on KLM Flight 751 to Amsterdam departing in less than 2 hours. I need immediate assistance. The North Korean embassy may attempt to stop our departure. I need your government to contact Dutch authorities and ensure our protection upon arrival in Amsterdam." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Sir, I need to, please hold while I contact my superiors." "Do not hang up. I am calling from a payphone," Kang said. "I will give you this number. If we are disconnected, call me back immediately." He read out the number printed on the phone. "Understood. Please hold." The line went silent except for faint static. Kang stood there, receiver pressed to his ear, watching the terminal around him. Ordinary travelers moved past, families and businesspeople and tourists. All of them blissfully unaware that a man's life, 4 lives, hung in the balance in this moment. 3 minutes passed. 4. 5. Kang's hand was cramping from gripping the receiver so tightly. Then the voice returned, "Mr. Kang, I have spoken with the Director of Consular Affairs. We are taking your request very seriously. We need you to answer several questions to verify your identity and establish your bona fides. First, what is your full position and rank at the DPRK embassy?" Kang answered that and a dozen more questions: his diplomatic identification number, his assignment history. Details about the Havana embassy's structure, information that only a genuine insider would know. As he spoke, he could hear another voice in the background on the South Korean end, presumably someone senior making additional calls. After 10 minutes of interrogation, the duty officer said, "Mr. Kang, we are contacting our embassy in Amsterdam right now. They will coordinate with Dutch immigration authorities and with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Seoul. When you land in Amsterdam, proceed immediately to passport control and request asylum. Identify yourself to the Dutch officers and state that you are seeking protection under the Republic of Korea's jurisdiction as a DPRK defector. Our embassy staff will meet you at the airport. Do you understand? Yes, Kang said, relief flooding through him. Thank you, Mr. Kang. One more thing. Do you have any classified documents or materials with you? He thought of the briefcase, sitting abandoned in his office. No, he admitted. There was an incident. I had to leave materials behind. But I have extensive knowledge of DPRK diplomatic operations in Latin America, intelligence networks, operational procedures. I can provide valuable information. Understood. That will be sufficient. Now get on your plane, Mr. Kang. We will handle everything else. Welcome to freedom. The line went dead. Kang stood there for a moment, the receiver still pressed to his ear, trying to process what had just happened. He had done it. The impossible thing, the terrifying thing, the thing he had barely believed possible. He had reached out across the divide, had made contact with the other Korea, and they had answered. They had listened. They had helped. He returned to Su Yian and the children at 10:23 p.m. It is done, he said quietly. I contacted the South Korean embassy. They are arranging everything. When we land in Amsterdam, we will be met by their representatives. We are going to be safe. Su Yian's eyes filled with tears. Really? It is really happening? It is really happening, Kang confirmed. In 90 minutes, we will be in the air. In 12 hours, we will be free. At 11:00 p.m., boarding was announced for KLM Flight 751 to Amsterdam. They joined the line, presented their boarding passes, and walked down the jetway. Kang kept expecting alarm bells, security officers, and some last-minute intervention from Pak Chol-min or embassy staff. But there was nothing, only the ordinary routine of international air travel. They found their seats 27A, 27B, 27C, and 27D, a row of 4 in the economy section. Kang took the window seat, Su Yian beside him, the children in the middle seats. He buckled his seatbelt with trembling hands. At 11:42 p.m., the aircraft door closed with a definitive thunk. At 11:51 p.m., 6 minutes late, the Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate. At 12:03 a.m. on June 25, 2023, the aircraft's wheels lifted off the runway at José Martí International Airport, climbing into the Caribbean night sky. Only then, only when Kang looked out the window and saw the lights of Havana falling away below, did he allow himself to believe it. They had escaped. Against all odds, against all the surveillance and control and power of the regime, 4 people had simply walked away. He reached for Su Yian's hand and squeezed it tightly. She squeezed back, and in that moment, no words were necessary. Behind them, the island of Cuba receded into darkness. Ahead, somewhere across the Atlantic, a new life waited, uncertain and frightening and free. The last 30 minutes had been the longest of Kang Chan-hyuk's life. But they had survived them. And now, finally, they could begin to hope. The KLM Boeing 777 touched down at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport at 3:17 p.m. local time on June 25, 2023, after a flight that had felt simultaneously endless and impossibly brief. Kang Chan-hyuk had not slept during the entire journey, despite the exhaustion that weighed on him like a physical burden. He had sat rigid in his seat, watching the moving map on the seatback screen. As the aircraft traced its path across the Atlantic, over the bulge of West Africa, then northward toward Europe. Every mile traveled was another mile between his family and the regime's reach, but he could not truly relax until they were under South Korean protection. Su Yian had managed a few hours of fitful sleep, her head resting against his shoulder. The children, after the initial excitement of takeoff, had watched movies and eventually dozed off as well. But Kang remained vigilant, his mind cycling through scenarios and possibilities, contingencies and dangers. What if the South Korean embassy had not been able to arrange protection with Dutch authorities? What if North Korea had somehow alerted Interpol, fabricated criminal charges, and demanded their detention? What if this entire escape ended not in freedom, but in some bureaucratic nightmare of statelessness and legal limbo? As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Kang gathered their belongings with trembling hands. The pilot's announcement crackled through the cabin speakers in Dutch, then English: "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Amsterdam. The local time is 3:20 p.m. and the temperature is 17 degrees Celsius. For your safety and comfort, please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. And the seatbelt sign has been turned off. On behalf of KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, thank you for flying with us today." The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began standing, retrieving luggage from overhead compartments, preparing to disembark in the timeless ritual of arrival. But Kang and his family remained seated, waiting as the crowd thinned. He had been instructed to proceed to passport control and request asylum, but the actual mechanics of this process remained unclear. Would they simply walk up to an immigration officer and announce their defection? Would there be special procedures, designated channels, specific protocols? They were among the last to leave the aircraft. The flight attendants, two cheerful Dutch women who had been unfailingly polite throughout the journey, smiled and wished them a pleasant stay in the Netherlands. Kang managed to return the smile, though his face felt frozen. They followed the signs toward passport control, walking through the long corridors of Schiphol's international terminal. The airport was enormous, gleaming with modernity, filled with shops and restaurants and thousands of travelers from every corner of the globe. After 6 years in Havana's relatively modest airport and a lifetime of North Korea's deliberately isolated infrastructure, the sheer scale and openness of this place were almost overwhelming. At passport control, there were separate lines for EU citizens, for non-EU citizens, and a smaller line marked diplomatic passports. Kang hesitated, then chose the diplomatic line, reasoning that their North Korean diplomatic passports would need special handling regardless. They waited behind a Ghanaian diplomat and his family. When their turn came, Kang stepped forward to the booth where a young Dutch immigration officer, a woman in her late 20s with blonde hair, pulled back in a neat bun, sat before a computer terminal. "Passports, please," she said in English, her tone professionally neutral. Kang handed over all 4 passports, the deep blue covers embossed with the DPRK state emblem. The officer opened the first one, scanned it, then looked up at Kang with a slight frown. "You are traveling from Cuba on North Korean diplomatic passports?" "Yes," Kang said, his mouth dry. "But we are not, we are requesting asylum." "Political asylum. We are defecting from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and requesting protection under the jurisdiction of the Republic of Korea." The words tumbled out in a rush, graceless but clear. The immigration officer's eyes widened slightly. She looked at Su Yeon, at the 2 children, then back at Kang. "One moment, please," she said, picking up a phone. What followed was a confusion of movement and activity. Within minutes, 2 senior immigration officials arrived, along with a uniformed Dutch police officer. Kang and his family were escorted away from the public passport control area, through a secure door, into a small office, furnished with a table, several chairs, and harsh fluorescent lighting. "Please sit," one of the officials said in English, his tone careful and measured. "My name is Inspector van der Berg. Can you explain your situation more fully?" Kang explained everything: his position at the North Korean embassy in Havana, his decision to defect, his contact with the South Korean embassy, and the arrangements that were supposed to have been made. As he spoke, the inspector took notes and made several phone calls, speaking rapid Dutch that Kang could not follow. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, Inspector van der Berg set down his phone and regarded Kang with an expression that might have been sympathy. "Mr. Kang, I have spoken with our foreign ministry and with representatives from the South Korean embassy here in Amsterdam. Your case is, shall we say, somewhat irregular, but everything appears to be in order. The Republic of Korea has confirmed that it will accept responsibility for you and your family. Officials from their embassy are on their way here now to meet you." The relief that washed over Kang was so intense that he felt lightheaded. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Thank you so much. You should understand," van der Berg continued, "that the Netherlands does not maintain diplomatic relations with North Korea. So there is no question of your being returned there. However, until the South Korean officials arrive and the transfer of custody is formalized, you are technically in a legal gray area. You will need to remain here in this secure area. Is that acceptable?" "Yes, of course," Kang said quickly. "Anything you require." They waited in that small office for another hour. A different official brought sandwiches and coffee, soft drinks for the children. Ye-na and Min-ho, confused and frightened by the strange proceedings, huddled close to their mother. Soo-yeon held them both, her face pale but composed, her eyes occasionally meeting Kang's with a mixture of relief and residual terror. At 5:43 p.m., the door opened and 3 people entered, 2 men in dark business suits and a woman in a navy blazer and skirt. All 3 were ethnically Korean, and when the elder of the 2 men spoke, it was in their native language, the Korean of Seoul. Not the slightly different dialect of the North. "Mr. Kang Chan-hyuk, Mrs. Han Soo-yeon, Kang Ye-na, Kang Min-ho," he said formally, bowing slightly. "My name is Ambassador Cho Young-won, the head of mission at the Republic of Korea's embassy here in the Netherlands. On behalf of the government and people of the Republic of Korea, I welcome you. You are safe now. You are home." Those last 3 words, "you are home," struck Kang with unexpected force. Home. For his entire life, home had been the North, the Democratic People's Republic, the system he had served. He had never thought of the South as home, had been trained from childhood to think of it as enemy territory, occupied by American imperialists and their puppets. Yet here was this man, this representative of that supposedly enemy nation, welcoming him home. Kang found that he could not speak. His throat had closed up, his eyes were burning with unshed tears. He could only bow in return, deeply and gratefully. The formalities took another 2 hours: paperwork, documentation, and statements. Ambassador Cho explained that they would be flying to Seoul the next day on a Korean Air direct flight, that accommodations had been arranged at a hotel near the airport for tonight, and that everything would be taken care of. The South Korean government, he assured them, had extensive experience handling defector cases and would provide comprehensive support. At 8:15 p.m., they left Schiphol Airport in a South Korean embassy vehicle, a black Mercedes sedan with diplomatic plates. As they drove through the Dutch countryside toward Amsterdam proper, Kang stared out the window at the neat houses, the organized infrastructure, the casual prosperity visible everywhere. This was Europe, the West, the capitalist world he had been taught to despise. Yet what he saw was not decadence or inequality but simply ordinary people living ordinary lives in a well-functioning society. They arrived at the hotel, a modern business establishment near the airport, at 9:00 p.m. Ambassador Cho had arranged a 2-bedroom suite for them. "Get some rest," he advised. "Tomorrow will be a long day. Our flight to Seoul departs at 11:30 a.m. I will collect you from the hotel at 8:30 a.m. After the ambassador departed, the 4 of them stood in the hotel suite, looking around at the comfortable furnishings, the large beds, the modern bathroom with its gleaming fixtures. For several moments, no one spoke. Then Min-ho, with the resilience of childhood, said, "I am hungry. Can we order food?" They ordered room service hamburgers and French fries, pizza, and ice cream. Food that was ordinary in this world but had been a rare luxury in their previous life. They ate together, sitting on the beds, the television playing a Dutch news channel that none of them could understand, and slowly the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were free. They were safe. They were going to South Korea. The Korean air flight from Amsterdam to Seoul departed on schedule on June 26, 2023. It was a long journey, nearly 11 hours, but this time Kang allowed himself to sleep, truly sleep, for the first time in days. When he woke, they were descending toward Incheon International Airport, and through the window, he could see the Korean peninsula spread out below, cities and roads and mountains, the land of his ancestors, divided for 70 years but still recognizably one. They landed at 6:47 a.m. local time on June 27, 2023. As they disembarked and walked through the jetway, Kang felt his heart pounding. This was it. This was South Korea, the Republic of Korea, the nation he had been trained to hate and fear, the nation he was now trusting with his family's lives and future. They were met at the gate by officials from the Ministry of Unification, the government agency responsible for inter-Korean affairs and North Korean defector resettlement. The senior official, a man in his 50s named Director Park Min-soo, greeted them warmly. "Welcome to the Republic of Korea," he said, shaking Kang's hand firmly. "We have been expecting you. Everything has been prepared. Please, come with us." They were escorted through a private channel, avoiding the public areas of the airport, processed through a special immigration procedure, and then driven in a government vehicle toward Seoul. As they traveled along the expressway, Kang stared in amazement at the landscape unfolding around them. The towering apartment blocks, the endless streams of traffic, the advertisements and billboards, the sheer density and energy of this place. It was so different from the north. Everything was so different. The colors seemed brighter, the buildings taller, the people, visible in the cars around them and in the streets as they entered. The city looked healthier, better dressed, more relaxed. There was an air of casual prosperity, of ordinary comfort, that simply did not exist in the north outside of the most elite circles in Pyongyang. Their destination was Hanawon, the settlement support center for North Korean refugees, located in Ansong, about 80 kilometers south of Seoul. Established in 1999, Hanawon provided newly arrived North Korean defectors with intensive education and training to help them adapt to South Korean society. Everything from understanding market economics and democratic governance to practical skills like using ATMs, navigating public transportation, and job searching. They arrived at Hanawon at 10:15 a.m. The facility was more pleasant than Kang had expected, a campus-like setting with several low-rise buildings, trees and gardens, and a recreational area. It looked more like a vocational training center than the grim interrogation facility he had half feared. Director Park personally escorted them through the intake process. They underwent medical examinations, comprehensive interviews about their backgrounds and reasons for defecting, and initial orientation sessions. Throughout it all, the staff members were unfailingly polite, patient, and even warm. No one treated them with suspicion or hostility. There were no accusations, no ideological lectures, no demands for self-criticism. Instead, there was something Kang had not expected and could barely comprehend: genuine care. It was the small things that began to break through Kang's defensive reserve. The accumulated habits of caution and distrust that decades in the North Korean system had ingrained in him. On their first evening at Hanawon, after a long day of processing and orientation, A young female staff member named Miss Kim brought them to their assigned living quarters, a small but comfortable apartment with 2 bedrooms, a sitting area, and a private bathroom. "This will be your home for the next few months," she explained, showing them how various appliances worked. "If you need anything at all, just press this call button and someone will come to help you. We want you to be comfortable here." After she left, Soo-yeon turned to Kang with tears streaming down her face. "Did you hear her?" she whispered. "She said, if you need anything at all." Chan-hyuk, when was the last time anyone said something like that to us? When was the last time anyone cared about our comfort? That night, lying in a real bed with clean sheets, in a heated room with functioning electricity. Kang stared at the ceiling and tried to process what was happening. In the north, in the embassy in Havana, even basic amenities had come with strings attached. Had been privileges to be earned through loyalty and obedience, had been subject to sudden withdrawal if one fell from favor. Here, they were being given these things simply because they were human beings who needed them. The next morning, they attended their first group orientation session with other newly arrived defectors. About 20 people ranging from teenagers to elderly individuals. The instructor, a woman in her 40s named Mrs. Lee, who had herself defected from the North 15 years earlier, welcomed everyone warmly. "I know you are all confused and frightened right now," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I know because I felt exactly the same way when I arrived. You have been taught your entire lives that this place, this country, is your enemy. You have been told that South Koreans look down on North Koreans, that we will be treated as second-class citizens, and that we will struggle and suffer here. Some of that is true. Life here is not easy, and there is competition and hardship. But I want you to understand something very important: you are not alone. You are not abandoned. There are systems here, organizations, people whose job, whose mission, is to help you succeed. And more than that, you are citizens now. Full citizens of the Republic of Korea, with all the rights and protections that entail. This is your country now, and we welcome you home." Several people in the room were crying openly. Kang felt his own eyes burning, but fought to maintain composure. He was a diplomat, a trained professional, someone accustomed to controlling his emotions. But something in Mrs. Lee's words, in her genuine warmth and sincerity, was cracking through his defenses. Over the following weeks, as they progressed through Hanawon's structured program, Kang began to experience a profound emotional transformation. The program was comprehensive classes on South Korean history and political systems, economic principles and market mechanisms, practical life skills, cultural adjustment, and job preparation. But more important than the content was the atmosphere in which it was delivered. The instructors treated them with respect, as adults capable of learning and growing. The counselors who met with them individually listened without judgment, offering support and guidance. The medical staff who conducted follow-up health screenings were gentle and thorough. The cafeteria workers who served their meals smiled and asked if everything was satisfactory. These small acts of kindness, repeated daily, had a cumulative effect. Kang found himself slowly letting go of the hypervigilance that had governed his life for so long. The constant calculation of what to say, how to act, who might be watching and reporting. Here, people said what they actually thought. They disagreed with each other openly in class discussions. They criticized government policies without fear. And nothing bad happened to them. One evening in mid-July, about 3 weeks into their stay at Hanawon, Kang and Soo-yeon were sitting in the small courtyard outside their building, watching Ye-na and Min-ho play with other children. The summer air was warm, cicadas were singing in the trees, and the children's laughter rang out freely. "Look at them," Soo-yeon said softly, watching their children. "Have you ever seen them laugh like that? So freely, so loudly, without worrying about who might hear. Kang had not. In Havana, in Pyongyang, during their visits home, the children had always been subdued. Careful, conscious of the need to maintain proper behavior and avoid attracting negative attention. But here, they were just children, playing and laughing and being loud the way children naturally are when they feel safe. This place, Su Yian continued, her voice trembling slightly, it is not perfect. I can see that already. There is competition, inequality, and problems. But Chan-hyuk, people here are kind. They treat each other with basic human decency. They help strangers. They care about whether we are comfortable, whether we are warm, and whether we have enough to eat. In all our years in the North, did anyone in authority ever care about such things? Kang reached for her hand and held it tightly. No, he said quietly. They did not. And I did not fully understand what we were missing until we came here. This is what a normal society looks like, Su Yian. This is what life is supposed to be like. Not perfect, but humane. Not without problems, but with systems designed to help people rather than control them. That night, for the first time since their escape, Kang allowed himself to cry, truly cry, releasing months and years and decades of accumulated stress and fear and grief. Su Yian held him as he wept, and when he finally regained control, he felt lighter somehow, as if a burden he had carried for so long had finally been set down. As their time at Hanawon progressed through August and into September of 2023, Kang watched his family begin to transform. Yena, always curious and intelligent, blossomed in the educational environment. Asking endless questions, devouring the books available in the center's library, and eagerly engaging with her instructors. Minho, more reserved by nature, gradually came out of his shell. Making friends with other children, discovering interests in art and music that he had never had the opportunity to explore before. Su Yian, initially resistant and terrified by their decision to defect, began to relax and even smile more frequently. She attended classes on South Korean culture and language. With determination, recognizing that mastering the subtle differences between North and South Korean speech patterns would be crucial for their integration. She made friends with other defector women, sharing stories and anxieties and hopes. And Kang himself, the diplomat who had served a regime he came to despise, began to envision a future that did not involve constant fear and deception. He attended specialized workshops for high-level defectors, learning about opportunities in research, academia, and government consulting. His extensive knowledge of North Korean diplomatic operations and Latin American affairs was valuable. He was told there were organizations that would be interested in his expertise. On September 15, 2023, they completed their program at Hanawon and graduated in a small ceremony attended by government officials and support organization representatives. Each family received a certificate of completion, information about resettlement, support services, and financial assistance to help them establish independent lives. Standing on the stage accepting his certificate, looking out at the audience where his wife and children sat watching with proud expressions, Kang felt something he had not felt in longer than he could remember: hope. Not the false, propaganda-fed hope of the North, where every hardship was supposedly temporary and every promise of a better tomorrow rang hollow. But real hope, grounded in the evidence of his own eyes, in the kindness he had experienced, in the opportunities he could see unfolding before them. This was not paradise. South Korea had its problems, its inequalities, its challenges. But it was a place where a person could live with dignity, could work with purpose, could raise children who would not inherit the sins and failures of a broken system. As they left Hanawon that afternoon, driving toward their new apartment in Seoul's Nawon district, provided through a resettlement support program, Kang looked at his family and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the September sunshine streaming through the car windows. They had crossed an ocean and a political divide. They had abandoned everything familiar, everyone they had known, every certainty they had possessed. They had leapt into an unknown darkness, trusting that something better waited on the other side. And they had found it. Not perfection, but possibility. Not a flawless system, but a humane one. Not the end of struggle, but the beginning of hope. This warm southern land, with all its complexity and challenges, had become their home. And in its embrace, the frozen places in their hearts were beginning, slowly and tentatively, to thaw. The autumn of 2023 in Seoul was a season of transformation for the Kang family. They moved into their new apartment in Hanawon district on September 18. A modest two-bedroom unit in a middle-aged building that overlooked a busy street lined with small shops and restaurants. The apartment was not luxurious by South Korean standards. It was older, smaller, and less well-appointed than the housing occupied by many of their neighbors. But to the Kang family, stepping through that door for the first time, it represented something miraculous: their own space. Their own home, earned not through loyalty to a regime but simply by virtue of their humanity and their need. Soo Yeon stood in the empty living room that first day, tears streaming down her face as she looked around at the bare walls and worn floors. "It is ours," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Chan-hyuk, this place is really ours. No one can take it away because we said the wrong thing or failed to show sufficient enthusiasm at a political meeting. It is simply ours." Kang understood exactly what she meant. In the North, everything had been contingent, provisional, subject to withdrawal if one's loyalty was questioned or one's usefulness diminished. Housing, employment, food rations, even family cohesion, all of it existed at the pleasure of the state and could be revoked without warning or appeal. But here, they had rights, legal protections, systems designed to ensure that basic needs were met regardless of political orthodoxy. The apartment came partially furnished through a program run by an NGO that specialized in North Korean resettlement support. Over the following days, volunteers helped them move in donated furniture: beds and a sofa, a small dining table, kitchen utensils, bedding, and towels. Each item was modest, used, and sometimes showed signs of wear. But each represented an act of generosity from strangers who had no obligation to care but chose to anyway. Ye-na and Min-ho enrolled in their new schools on September 25, 2023. The South Korean government's policy was to integrate North Korean defector children into mainstream schools rather than segregating them, though additional support services were provided to help with the transition. Ye-na entered the second year of middle school at Hanawon Girls' Middle School, while Min-ho began his first year at the same institution's boys' division. The night before their first day, both children were visibly anxious. Ye-na, now 14 and acutely aware of social dynamics, worried that her classmates would identify her as a North Korean defector and treat her as an outsider. Min-ho, quieter and more introspective, simply clung to his mother and said he did not want to go. Kang sat with them both at the kitchen table that evening, holding their hands. "I know you are frightened," he said gently. "I would be too. But I want you to understand something important. In the North, we always had to hide who we really were, what we really thought. We had to perform loyalty, demonstrate enthusiasm, suppress our questions and doubts. Here, you do not have to do that. You can be yourselves. You can ask questions, make mistakes, learn, and grow without fear that every misstep will be recorded and used against you forever." "But what if the other students are mean?" Ye-na asked, her voice small and uncertain. "What if they make fun of our accent or the way we talk?" "Some might," Kang admitted honestly. "Not everyone will be kind. But many will be, and those are the people you will find and befriend." And more importantly, you will have teachers and counselors whose job is to help you succeed, not to catch you making mistakes. That is the difference. The next morning, Kang and Su Yian walked both children to school, a 20-minute journey through the bustling streets of their new neighborhood. The September morning was crisp and clear, the city around them alive. With activity commuters rushing to subway stations, shopkeepers opening their businesses, elderly residents doing morning exercises in the small park they passed. It was the ordinary rhythm of a functioning society, mundane yet miraculous to people who had spent their lives in a dysfunctional one. At the school gate, they hugged their children and watched them walk nervously through the entrance, disappearing into the flow of students in their identical uniforms. Su Yian gripped Kang's hand tightly as they walked home. "Do you think they will be all right?" she asked. "They will be better than all right," Kang replied, though he shared her anxiety. "They are strong, intelligent, adaptable. They will find their way." And they did. Slowly, gradually, sometimes with difficulty, but they did. Yena discovered that several of her classmates were genuinely interested in her experiences and asked questions with curiosity rather than judgment. Her teachers, aware of her background, provided extra support in subjects where South Korean education had progressed differently. From the limited schooling available to diplomatic children in Havana. By October, she had made 2 close friends and was participating in the school's English club, where her fluency, developed during years abroad, made her something of a star. Min Ho's adjustment took longer. He was more reserved, more traumatized by the upheaval of their escape, more inclined to withdraw than engage. But his homeroom teacher, Mr. Choi, a man in his 50s with decades of experience and a particular interest in helping struggling students, took him under his wing. He arranged for Min Ho to join the art club, where the boy's talent for drawing, previously unrecognized and uncultivated, began to emerge. By November, Min Ho was bringing home sketches and paintings that revealed a sensitive, observant soul gradually learning to trust the world around him. For Kang himself, the challenge of building a new life was both more complex and more urgent. At 46, he needed to establish a career, an identity, and a purpose in this new society. He had valuable knowledge and experience, but translating that into meaningful employment in South Korea's competitive job market required careful strategy and persistent effort. In late September, he had several meetings with representatives from the Institute for National Security Strategy. This government-affiliated research organization specializes in North Korean affairs and inter-Korean relations. His background as a senior diplomat with extensive knowledge of North Korean operations in Latin America made him a potentially valuable asset. The lead researcher who interviewed him, Drive. Kim Young-chul, a South Korean academic in his 50s, who had spent his career studying the North, questioned him intensively for several hours across multiple sessions. "Mr. Kang, Drive," Kim said during their third meeting on October 5, 2023, "your knowledge is indeed valuable. But I need to be frank with you. The research community here is small, specialized, and highly competitive. You will face skepticism from some quarters simply because of your background. Some people will question your motives, your reliability, and your objectivity. You will need to prove yourself repeatedly, to demonstrate that you can think analytically rather than ideologically, that you can contribute genuine insights. Rather than simply repeating what you think we want to hear. Are you prepared for that challenge?" Kang met the researcher's gaze steadily. "Dr. Kim, I spent 23 years serving a system I ultimately recognized as fundamentally wrong. I participated in that system, benefited from it, and helped perpetuate it. That is a burden I will carry for the rest of my life. I cannot undo the past, cannot erase my complicity. But I can use what I know, what I learned during those years, to help this country." My new country, better understand the threat it faces and the opportunities for eventual reunification. If that means proving myself repeatedly, facing skepticism and doubt, working twice as hard as someone without my background, then that is what I will do. I owe that much, at minimum, to the people of South Korea who have welcomed us when they had no obligation to do so. Dr. Kim studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. I believe you. We will offer you a position as a research associate, initially on a contract basis for 1 year. Your primary responsibilities will be analyzing North Korean diplomatic strategies in developing countries and providing insights into regime decision-making processes. The compensation will be modest by Seoul standards, certainly less than what you might earn in the private sector. But it will be meaningful work, and it will give you a platform to contribute. Are you interested? Yes, Kang said without hesitation. Very much so. He began his new position on October 16, 2023, reporting to an office in downtown Seoul, in a building near the Ministry of Unification headquarters. The work was intellectually demanding. He was required to write detailed analyses, participate in research meetings, brief government officials, and collaborate with other researchers, many of whom had impressive academic credentials from top universities. He was, by far, the oldest junior researcher in the organization. And he could sense the unspoken questions from some of his colleagues. Was he really competent? Could a North Korean diplomat really make the transition to objective scholarship? Was he worth the security risk that employing a former regime official necessarily entailed? Kang responded to these doubts not with defensiveness but with meticulous work. He arrived early and stayed late. He produced reports that were thorough, well-researched, and analytically rigorous. He volunteered for additional projects. He sought feedback and implemented it. Slowly, gradually, he began to win respect, if not complete trust, from his colleagues. But the transition was not purely professional. There were psychological and emotional challenges that no amount of hard work could fully address. In November 2023, Kang began experiencing severe insomnia and anxiety attacks. Symptoms that his doctor at a local clinic identified as likely post-traumatic stress disorder related to his experiences and the dramatic upheaval of defection. The doctor, a woman in her 40s named Drive Park, who specialized in treating North Korean defectors, prescribed medication but also strongly recommended psychotherapy. Mr. Kang, she said during their consultation on November 20, you have been through an extraordinary trauma. You have lost your country, your identity, and everyone you knew outside your immediate family. You carry guilt about those you left behind, fear about your family's future, and uncertainty about your place in this new society. These are heavy burdens, and they do not simply disappear because you are safe now. You need to process them, work through them. Please consider the counseling I am recommending. Kang was initially resistant. In North Korean culture, particularly among the elite, seeking psychological help was seen as weakness, a failure of ideological fortitude. But Soo Yeon, recognizing her husband's suffering, insisted. You took care of us, she said firmly. You got us out, you got us here, you have provided for us. Now let someone take care of you for once. He began weekly therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in complex trauma and refugee experiences. The sessions were difficult. They required him to confront memories and emotions he had suppressed for years, to acknowledge the full weight of what he had done and what it had cost. He talked about the colleagues he had informed on to advance his own career, the lies he had told, and the system he had served despite growing doubts. He talked about his parents and siblings in Pyongyang, who by now certainly knew of his defection and were likely facing severe consequences. He talked about the children starving in North Korea's provinces while he had lived in relative comfort, and the guilt that came from having saved his own family while millions remained trapped. The counselor, Ms. Han, listened without judgment, offering not absolution but simply space for him to process his experiences. "Mr. Kang," she said during one session in early December, "you cannot save everyone. You cannot undo the past. But you can choose what you do with your future, how you use your experiences and knowledge. You made a choice to save your family, to give them a chance at a better life. That was not a small thing. And now you are working to contribute to eventual reunification, to help create conditions where others might also find freedom. That is meaningful. That matters." In mid-December 2023, Kang was approached by a representative from a human rights organization that worked with North Korean defectors. They were planning a conference for early 2024 focused on the experiences of high-level defectors, and wanted Kang to consider giving a public testimony about his decision to escape and his experiences in South Korea. "I know it is a lot to ask," the representative, a young woman named Lee Min-ji, said during their coffee shop meeting on December 18. "Public testimony can be emotionally difficult, and it does carry some risks. North Korean agents do operate in the South. And while the security services are vigilant, there is always some danger. But your story is important, Mr. Kang. You were a privileged member of the elite, someone who seemingly had everything to lose by defecting. Yet you chose freedom for your family anyway. That sends a powerful message, especially to other North Korean officials serving abroad who might be having similar doubts but fear taking action." Kang considered the request carefully. He discussed it with Soo Yeon, who was anxious about the security implications but ultimately supportive. He thought about what such testimony might accomplish, what message it might send. On January 15, 2024, he stood at a podium in a Seoul hotel conference room before an audience of about 200 people: journalists, human rights activists, government officials, academics, and other North Korean defectors. He was nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the podium. But as he began to speak, the words flowed with unexpected clarity. "My name is Kang Chan-hyuk," he began in Korean, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Until June 24, 2023, I was a counselor at the North Korean embassy in Havana, Cuba. I was a loyal servant of the regime for 23 years. I received awards, promotions, and privileges. I was, by the standards of North Korean society, a success. And I was miserable, because I knew that the system I served was built on lies, oppression, and the suffering of millions." He talked about his growing disillusionment, about the satellite images that showed the stark contrast between North and South, about his realization that he could not in good conscience allow his children to inherit a system without hope or future. He described the escape, the fear, the uncertainty, and the almost miraculous support they had received from South Korean authorities. "I want to speak directly to North Korean officials who might be listening to or reading this testimony," he said, looking directly into the cameras that were recording the event. "I know what you are thinking, because I thought it too. You are thinking that defection means betraying your country, abandoning your parents and siblings to punishment, becoming a traitor forever marked by shame. You are thinking that South Korea is hostile, that you will be treated as a second-class citizen, that you will struggle and suffer in poverty and isolation. Some of that is true. Defection does mean leaving people behind, and they will suffer for your choice. That is the terrible price the regime extracts, and it is a burden you will carry forever. Integration here is not easy. You will face challenges, skepticism, and difficulties. But here is what I learned: South Korea is not perfect, but it is a place where human beings are treated with basic dignity. It is a place where your children can dream without fear, can ask questions without punishment, can build lives based on their talents and efforts rather than their family's political classification. It is a place where kindness exists, where strangers help each other, where systems are designed to support people rather than control them. If you are a diplomat serving abroad, if you are a trader or student or worker outside the regime's immediate reach, and if you have doubts, if you lie awake at night, wondering if there is another way, let me tell you there is. The path is terrifying, the costs are real, but freedom is possible. The Republic of Korea will welcome you. They welcomed me, a man who had spent decades serving their enemy, and they gave my family a chance at a real life. They can do the same for you. I cannot tell you that defection is the right choice for everyone in every circumstance. That is a decision only you can make, weighing your specific situation, your responsibilities, and your conscience. But I can tell you this: if you choose freedom, if you take that leap into the unknown, you will not be alone. There are people here, organizations and systems and individuals, who will help you. And there is a life waiting on this side that is worth the terrible price of getting here. He finished speaking and stepped back from the podium. The audience was silent for a moment, then applause began, growing louder and more sustained. Several people in the audience were crying. Kang looked out at those faces, so many of them showing empathy and understanding, and felt a profound sense of connection. This was his purpose now. Not serving a regime or advancing a career, but bearing witness, offering hope. Contributing in whatever way he could to eventual reunification and the liberation of the people still trapped in the North. On a cold evening in late January 2024, 7 months after they escaped from Cuba, the Kang family sat together in their small apartment in Hanawon district. Su Yeon had prepared dinner, a simple meal of rice, soup, and vegetables, nothing fancy but nourishing and warm. Yena was talking excitedly about a school project she was working on with her friends. Minho was showing his father a new drawing he had completed in art club, a landscape of mountains and sky rendered in delicate pencil strokes. Kang looked around at his family, at these 3 people who had trusted him enough to follow him into the unknown, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. They were not wealthy. They faced ongoing challenges adapting to this new society. They carried the scars of their past and the burden of those they had left behind. The road ahead remained uncertain, full of obstacles and difficulties. But they were together. They were free. They were building something new, something hopeful, something worth the terrible price they had paid to get here. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Kang sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room, working on a research paper about North Korean diplomatic strategies in Africa. Through the window, he could see the lights of Seoul spreading out across the landscape, millions of people living their lives in this imperfect but humane society. Somewhere to the north, beyond the DMZ and the barbed wire and the minefields, lay the other half of the peninsula, dark and closed and suffering. Someday, he thought, someday that darkness would lift. Someday the division would end, the system would crumble, and the people would be free. He might not live to see it. His children might not see it. But it would happen eventually, because nothing built on lies and oppression can stand forever. And when that day came, when freedom finally reached the North, there would be people like him, defectors, who had escaped and built new lives, ready to help rebuild, ready to share what they had learned, ready to guide others through the difficult transition from tyranny to liberty. He was drawing a new map now, not of political boundaries and diplomatic strategies, but of hope and possibility, of paths from darkness to light. It was a map he would spend the rest of his life refining, sharing, and offering to anyone who needed it. The last communication from the Caribbean had led to this: a new life, a new purpose, a new map pointing toward a better future. And in that small apartment in Seoul, on that cold January night, Kang Chan-hyuk, former servant of tyranny and new citizen of freedom, continued his work, one word at a time, building something that might one day help set his people free. The journey was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kang Chan-hyuk faced the future. Not with fear or resignation, but with something precious and powerful: hope.